Hey people, welcome to the Rung Testers, and in this video we're putting two of On's big stack max cushion trainers up against each other. We have got the new Cloudmonster 2 versus the Cloudeclipse. Now the Cloudeclipse was a new shoe that landed in 2023, while the Cloudmonster 2 is the follow-up to On's popular max stack big cushion cruiser. There's a lot of similarities between these two shoes. They've got similar silhouettes, similar weight, exact same pricing, but there are some important differences too. So which one of these shoes is best? Well, we've clocked the miles in both of them to do the testing to find out. Watch on for our On Cloudmonster 2 versus Cloudeclipse head-to-head. First up, some quick details then, starting with the stacks. Well, the Cloudmonster 2 now comes in at 35mm in the heel and 29mm in the forefoot. That's up 6mm across the midsole versus the first gen, but the drop stays at the same 6mm. On the On Cloudeclipse, it has a slightly higher midsole volume with 37mm in the heel, 31 in the forefoot, also for a 6mm drop. The Eclipse weighs in at 10.5 ounces or 297 grams in our UK men's 8.5 test shoe. That's exactly the same weight as the new Cloudmonster 2, which also lands at 10.5 ounces or 297 grams. And on the Cloudmonster 2, that's up just shy of an ounce or 20 grams on the old Monster, so it's a bit heavier. Price-wise, the Cloudmonster 2 is now £170 in the UK. That's increased £20 on the last gen. Stateside, it's also up to $180. That puts it in the same price as the Cloudeclipse. Both shoes are among the priciest daily trainers going. So let's give you a quick shoe comparison then, and the major difference here is in the midsole. Both shoes use helium foam, but the On Cloudeclipse has a bigger wedge that comes in this CloudTech phase setup that we first saw in the Cloudsurfer. The idea is the cloud elements collapse in sequence, a bit like dominoes, and then they're supposed to release as you kind of roll through to create a smoother transition and a bit more energy. Now that works with a speedboard plate that sits on the outside on the bottom of the midsole unit to provide some stiffness to those foam elements. Cloudmonster 2 sticks with the more traditional CloudTech elements with a new dual density foam setup. There's a nylon blend speedboard plate in there as well, but that's in the middle of the midsole. That speedboard has been reshaped apparently in this Gen 2 with the aim of providing greater efficiency from that touchdown to toe off. Now up top, the Cloudeclipse has dual layered mesh uppers. The Monster has these relatively flexible, breathable uppers that are virtually identical to the first gen. They're quite structured, but there's lots of perforations here to boost the breathability. The heel collars on both the Monster 2, they're both pretty much padded and quite plush. The Monster 2 are a little bit more so though than the Eclipse. They're still nicely padded, but you're getting more padding in the heel collars on the Monster. The tongues on both are relatively thin and foot wrapping, though the Eclipse is just a shade thicker. The gusseting on the Eclipse starts much higher up the shoe. The lacing here is quite different as well. The key distinction being that the On Cloudeclipse has this lower section, lower section that cinches across the midfoot here for a bit more security. Flip them over and the Monster has quite a familiar outsole design that you'll be used to if you know On shoes with pads on all the key impact areas. Those can sometimes wear thin quite quickly on the heels, but there are more kind of little mini studs on these than on the previous shoe, so hopefully that might boost the durability and grip somewhat. The Cloudeclipse looks to have more outsole rubber overall, particularly in the heel areas, and that's good news for heel strikers. Now in both shoes, On's trademark stone catching channel has largely been eliminated, so that is a thumbs up here. Both of these shoes do have a little habit of squeaking when they get wet. So a quick word on fit now that I've got them both on my feet at the same time here. Main difference overall is just that the Cloudmonster 2 feel a lot more loose, roomy in the toe box. There's much more space up front, much more volume across the top of the toes and lengthwise into the edge of the toe box. The Cloudeclipse just feel much more snug. There's a much more kind of held, I don't want to say race fit because they're not a race shoe, but that kind of hugging of the uppers across the top of the toes, and there's not quite as much room towards the end of the toe box in length. I also feel like the heel hold is better in the Cloudeclipse and across the midfoot slightly. There's just a bit more room and bagginess, I think, overall in the On Cloudmonster 2, which I said in the main Cloudmonster 2 review, and I definitely feel it here now that I've got one on each foot side by side.
So I found that both the Cloudmonster 2 and the Cloudeclipse fit me well in my normal running shoe size. I think the Cloudmonster 2 is a slightly roomier shoe, but I didn't find it to be a problem. I had a nice amount of room in the toe box with both shoes, and then a good hold around the heel and midfoot. I think when I first pulled on the Cloudmonster, it did feel quite big, and I was a bit worried about it, but after a couple of runs, I had no concerns at all. Both have got good breathable uppers that are comfortable, enough padding at the back, and in general, I was very happy in my normal running shoe size with both shoes.
So in terms of fit, I've had a good experience on both of these shoes. I've had them both in UK size 8, so that is my typical running shoe size, and that is my typical kind of on running shoe size that I would go for as well too. Now in the On Cloudmonster 2, I would say you're definitely getting something that feels a little bit more structured in terms of that fit compared to the On Cloudeclipse. There's definitely a lot more space up front in the toes. It does just generally or naturally open up a little bit wider from the midfoot to the toe box in the Cloudmonster compared to the Cloudeclipse, where I think you're getting a more relaxed kind of style upper, which has been fine for me, comfortable, does fit a little bit more narrow, but ultimately, you know, hasn't been uncomfortable or felt like it's been too snug up front of the toes. Elsewhere, you're getting, I would say, a little bit more padding on the Cloudmonster 2, which is kind of what I'd expect to see, but it's not. That doesn't mean you're not getting some good padding on the On Cloudeclipse in terms of that heel collar. You're getting slightly different tongues. I think you're getting something, again, a bit more relaxed on the On Cloudeclipse compared to the On Cloudmonster 2. So I think the big things for me is the fit has worked for me in my UK size 8. I say you're getting a little bit more space and kind of a wider fit on the On Cloudmonster 2, where you're getting something I think a bit more snug, a bit more relaxed, but also I think generally a good fit for me. And I personally would go true to size. I wouldn't look to play around going half a size or going up and down a size in either of these shoes.
In testing, I've run more than 50 miles in both of these shoes. That's on my usual mix of terrain, mostly road, some light river paths, and at a wide range of paces. The first thing you notice with the Monster 2 is that it's much softer, much squidgier underfoot than the original Monster. So if you thought the original Monster still wasn't soft enough, you might find this an upgrade. I, however, think that it's dulled the ride. And with that extra weight, everything is now just a bit more clumpy overall. It's not as snappy, it's not as versatile. I don't think the rocker works quite as well. And I also think the overall kind of feel on the foot from this shoe is much more baggy. It almost sort of lacks some of the precision and the fit that came with the first gen. So along with that extra weight and the softened ride, there's just something a bit flat about the whole thing for me anyway. That's how I find it. Now, in our review, I gave the Cloudeclipse a big thumbs up. I really liked this shoe. I sort of described it as somewhere between like a Cloudsurfer and a Cloudmonster hybrid. And I think it works. For a max stack shoe, it's surprisingly nippy and versatile. And it's almost got that kind of easy rolling rocket ride that the original Monster had, but with some of the compact precision and agility of the Surfer. Overall, for me, the Cloudeclipse ride is smooth, energetic, and a lot of fun. And it's definitely an easy shoe to log miles in. It's one of those shoes that I find myself reaching for a wide range of efforts. Now, to really tease out the differences between these two shoes, I also took them for a side-by-side mile, and here is what I found. So I've just done the side-by-side mile. I've got the Cloudeclipse on the left foot, I've got the Cloudmonster 2 on the right foot. The first question you might think when you put both these shoes on side-by-side is, why has On made another shoe which is very, very similar to the Cloudeclipse and changed what you know, the difference, the point of difference with the Cloudmonster, which was that it was kind of firmer, it was stiffer, there was better roll through. And I guess what's happened here is that the Cloudmonster 2 now feels a bit more like the Cloudeclipse, only it's not as good. And I would say that the energy and the roll through that you get from the Cloudeclipse here is better than you get from the Cloudmonster, which just feels, yeah, I guess there's a bit more cushioning, there's a bit more softness, but I think it feels just a little bit more flaccid. It's just not as, you know, compact and precise and good. The roll through from the rock ring's not as good. Everything just feels a little bit more flat, and that is where the Eclipse kind of now feels much like a better shoe, because there's much more easy roll through, there's much more natural feeling on the foot, there's a lot more precision. Like, I feel like if you set out to make a slightly soggier but not really that much more cushioned Cloudeclipse, that's what you've done with the Cloudmonster 2. I don't know, I thought the Cloudeclipse initially was made to be a softer Cloudmonster because the original Cloudmonster was a bit firmer. That's something that maybe some people didn't feel like they would, you know, they enjoyed that firmness still that you got from the On shoe, but I thought it had a great kind of stiff roll through. Then the Cloudeclipse came along and arguably felt a bit softer tuned than the Cloudmonster. If you wanted that kind of softness, you were getting a bit more from the Cloudeclipse. But now the Cloudmonster feels just a tad softer, but not as soft and cushioned and protective and nice as some of those kind of, you know, big cushion shoes that we sort of talk about in this vein. You know, a Nimbus, 1080 V13, Sockety Ride 17, those kind of shoes. Doesn't quite do that job. Now, if you felt like the On Cloudeclipse was a little bit too snug and not enough room in the toe box, there is more in the Cloudmonster 2. That is one thing that you are going to get here. And so I get potentially for much longer runs where you want a bit more room in the toe box, you want a bit more space for the toes to spread and flex, and you know, if your feet are going to swell, that kind of thing, then the Cloudmonster 2 is going to give you more of that than the Cloudeclipse, which does feel a bit more dialed in and a bit more snug. And therefore, if you're talking about going sort of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, maybe the Eclipse might get a little bit too snug and the Monster 2 would do that job for you. But I think in terms of the ride underfoot, the Eclipse just has a better roll through. The rockering is better. There's a stiffness and a roll through that comes through that's much better than the Cloudmonster 2, which when you land, you just feel a bit flat and the cushioning feels a bit soggy and a bit flaccid, and just like I'm not getting the response that maybe I got from that original Monster. As you land, I think the transition in the Cloudmonster 2 just isn't quite as effective and efficient as you're getting in the Cloudeclipse. There's something that feels a bit disconnected from heel to toe, which is not so bad if you're running a bit more up on your kind of forefoot, but if you're landing a bit further back in the shoe, you're sort of almost waiting for that kind of midsole to respond and give back and kick you on out of that kind of toe off. You don't get that in the Cloudeclipse. It just feels a lot more connected.
So I've logged about 50k in both of these shoes, probably a little bit more in the Cloudeclipse actually, which is the shoe we had first of the pair, and I do think they're pretty different shoes, despite the fact they've got a lot of similarities on paper with the same price, same drop, obviously same brand, but the difference in the midsole here really is very apparent on the run, I found. With the Eclipse, you've got the Cloudtech Phase midsole and a much more rockered ride, and the midsole feels a lot fuller. There's more ground contact from the outsole as well than you have with the Cloudmonster, and it just creates a smoother ride for sure. Neither are particularly soft shoes, which is obviously usually the case with On. They're not known for making the softest shoes on the market, but the Eclipse I think has got a little bit more softness, and really it's the rocker that comes into play that gives you that nice smooth transition and makes your shoe quite a versatile shoe, I think. For a big shoe like this, the Cloudeclipse isn't that heavy. I did a speed session in this shoe, and I've done long runs where I picked up the pace a little bit, and it is quite comfortable to do that in the Cloudeclipse, partly because it's not that heavy, but also because it's a fairly firm platform, which helps sometimes you're going to up the pace, and it's got that rocker, which does create a nice smooth ride, and it means you can just tick over at a variety of paces. I also do like the rocker just for very relaxed, easy runs as well, because it just moves you through your foot strike quite nicely. It's comfortable the way the foam is set up. You've got a little bit more comfort underfoot, I'd say, than the Cloudmonster 2, which is built for comfort, obviously, and it's a heavier, bigger shoe than the original Cloudmonster, but it still doesn't feel that comfortable. This feels much more like a traditional On shoe to me. You've got the pods there, you've got the podded outsole, and it creates a fairly firm ride. It's got a more of a snap through rather than a very smooth transition like the Cloudeclipse, but it doesn't really give you much back. There's not a lot of bounce in the foam or anything like that, and I think that's the same with the Cloudeclipse. It's not like a particularly bouncy foam, but the geometry is well set up, so you do get a nice smooth ride from it, and that means that even though the foam is so bouncy, it is a comfortable shoe and a shoe that works for a variety of runs. Cloudmonster for me is just a slow shoe, really, a shoe you just use for those easy runs, ticking off slow runs. I didn't love it when I went for a longer run in it as well, just because it's just not the kind of ride I really like. Like I say, it isn't very soft or comfortable, it's not particularly bouncy, the snappy ride through isn't as comfortable under the forefoot in particular as the Cloudeclipse. Just feels like you're getting a lot more foam under the forefoot of the shoe with the Cloudeclipse, and it feels that way anyway, and it feels more comfortable as a result there. So all in all, yeah, the Cloudmonster I didn't love particularly during our testing, or I did enjoy the Cloudeclipse quite a lot. Just been out for a little run with both shoes on at the same time, and yeah, it's just noticeable you've just got a slightly more fluid and comfortable ride from the Cloudeclipse, and it does feel a bit lighter on the foot. The Cloudmonster 2 is just a little bit dead for me, and it is a bit heavy. Like, I didn't mind the original Cloudmonster because it was quite a light shoe, and for a cushion shoe that had a bit of protection, it had a bit about it, a bit of versatility. I think the Cloudeclipse now plays that role within On's lineup because it is a cushion shoe that is fairly versatile, whereas the Cloudmonster 2, I don't know, if you've got to really crave the traditional feel of the On shoes, that firmer feeling. You're not getting a load of bounce back, but you are getting a pretty protective shoe, I'd say that, the Cloudmonster. It does do that, but all in all, the rides have a lot to it that I really love, whereas the Cloudeclipse, does have a bit more about it with that rocker.
Okay, so into that run test now. These are both max cushion shoes from On, and ultimately they are designed for the same types of runs. These are shoes that are going to protect over longer distances, are going to give you a good level of cushioning in terms of seeing some comfort as well in those longer distances, but also, as we saw with the original Cloudmonster and what we were hoping for the Cloudmonster 2, and what we've kind of seen with it on Cloudeclipse, is that you're going to see some versatility in that shoe as well, hopefully, and allow you to kind of mix up your kind of speeds and paces in these shoes. Now, what I'd say my experience of these two shoes, the first thing that has stood out for me are the weights of these shoes. The Cloudmonster 2 is the heavier of the two shoes. I think ultimately it's jumped up in weight from the On Cloudmonster. and the On Cloudeclipse is noticeably lighter in comparison. I think ultimately, straight away, that kind of restricts, I think, what these shoes can be used for in terms of that versatility. And I think you're gonna want to run maybe a little bit more up tempo generally, just because of the weights are different in the On Cloudeclipse. The other part is the midsole. Now, the On Cloudmonster 2 is based on the kind of the Cloud tech that we know. There's more of it than the Cloudmonster. It's a little bit softer, and you can kind of just see from squeezing it that it's softer than the Cloudmonster midsole, but ultimately it's still a little on the firmer side. And even putting that extra amount of it does mean you're still getting something a lot firmer compared to what you're getting in the On Cloudeclipse, which is the kind of Cloud tech phase, which is that kind of slight difference in terms of design of those kind of pods. They're more angular, they kind of collapse a lot more, it's a lot softer underfoot as well too, so you're getting something a lot softer and a lot comfortable. It's not too plush like it is on the On Cloudsurfer, so you are getting some firmness there, but it's definitely on the right side of kind of plush and giving you a good mix of that kind of firmness that you do want if you want to run a little bit quicker. I would say the rocker in the Cloudeclipse as well makes it more suitable for more up-tempo running, and again, coupled with the kind of overall weight of the shoe, it does just feel a little bit nicer in terms of wanting to run a little bit quicker in this shoe. You're not probably going to do speed work in it, but I've definitely found if I wanted to run a little bit more up-tempo in the On Cloudeclipse, it's been easier to do it in this shoe compared to the Cloudmonster 2. And I just think there's a lot of things going against the Cloudmonster 2 in terms of wanting to do that. In terms of shoes going for that kind of longer run, easy run, that kind of big weekend kind of Sunday run, the On Cloudmonster 2 is definitely going to give you a lot more protection. Just naturally, it's bigger. That stack is bigger as well too. There's that firmer feel compared to the On Cloudeclipse as well too, but I think you can do that in this shoe as well. It's going to feel a little bit softer, but I found in my longer runs it hasn't been an issue running longer in this. You may be getting a little bit more protection than the Cloudmonster 2, but ultimately I think you're getting a good level here on Cloudeclipse to give it that scope to run longer in it as well too. Outsole wise, you're definitely getting a lot more on the Cloudmonster 2 in terms of that, which is kind of what I'd expect to see. It's a shoe that wants to kind of hold up over longer distances. There's a lot more rubber. You can see quite clearly there's more rubber on the kind of the rear of the shoe and on the forefoot as well too. So if you wanted that kind of extra level of durability, then I think you're going to get that and the kind of level of grip on the Cloudmonster 2. But you know, I've run plenty in the On Cloudeclipse since we've tested it, and the grip has been absolutely fine for me. I just think if you care about durability, then I think you're probably going to get an overall grip and traction. You're going to get a lot more from the On Cloudmonster 2. But ultimately for me, I would say my experience has been nicer with the On Cloudeclipse. I think that you're getting something more protective on Cloudmonster 2. I think it can work well for longer runs, but ultimately I think you're getting something on the On Cloudeclipse that can work for similar runs and maybe give you a little bit more versatility overall.
Verdict then, well, this is an easy one for me. I would choose the Cloudeclipse over the Cloudmonster 2. Things weren't quite as clear-cut between the Eclipse and the original Monster, but I think the changes to the Monster 2 have taken some of the edge off that shoe. And basically what's happened is you kind of swapped in a softer ride that offers more cushioning for sure, but feels a bit more ponderous to me without really getting that big pillowy cushion of something like the Nimbus. The Cloudeclipse is still nicely cushioned overall, I think, but there's a stiffer, firmer edge to it that I think works really nicely with the rocker for a more natural roll through. Perhaps it's the positioning of the plate that sits at the bottom to add that kind of stiffness rather than the middle. The only caveat here, I think, is if you really want a big roomy toe box, the Monster 2 has much more space, but I don't think I'd personally trade that for the Cloudeclipse's more nimble ride. So for me, it's Cloudeclipse, or I'd still go for the older, firmer Monster over the Monster 2, because I think that had much more versatility.
So verdict's a pretty simple one for me, because the shoes are now priced the same. That the first Cloudmonster was a fair bit cheaper than the Eclipse, and there was a case for looking as that if you are looking for a cushioned on shoe. But at the same price, I think the Cloudeclipse is just a better shoe all round, getting a more cushioned experience that feels more comfortable, but it's also got the smoother ride, that nice rocker on it, which means that the ride feels more enjoyable, but also it's got more versatility. I think it's a shoe that can do a mix of training. It's very good for long runs. It's enjoyable for slight speed sessions. I still want to take it down the track, do all that speed work in the Cloudeclipse, but it has got some versatility to it. Cloudmonster 2 to me just feels like a big old unit of a shoe that's protecting the legs okay, but doesn't feel that soft or cushy underfoot. The ride's not that fluid, not that fun, and it's No, it's kind of fine, but I just think the Cloudeclipse is a better shoe all round. They're both pretty expensive shoes. I'd say if you are looking for a cushion shoe, you can find better, cheaper options, things like the Brooks Ghost Max, Puma Magnify Nitro 2. But picking between these two, it's very easy for me to say that I prefer the Cloudeclipse because I just do on every level. It's the same price, the ride's more fun, it's more versatile, even think it looks a bit nicer. So yeah, I'd get the Cloudeclipse out of these two.
So my vote's on whether you should go for the On Cloudmonster 2 or the On Cloudeclipse. Well, I think you're probably going to know how I'm going to go with this one. And this is the shoe, the On Cloudeclipse, that I've actually run plenty in after we tested it. And I think there's a big reason for that. I think this is On's best shoe. I think it's its best kind of max cushion shoe as well too. The midsole changes take On in the right direction in terms of where it needs to be. And I think with the On Cloudmonster 2, it is not a better shoe than the original Cloudmonster. I think the changes haven't made it a better shoe than its previous shoe, and I don't think it has the same versatility that you get in the On Cloudeclipse from a kind of max cushion point of view. And I think if you wanted the shoe that's going to give you that scope to run a mixture of paces, can still be a shoe you can run longer in, the On Cloudeclipse can do that. And I think it's it's a lighter shoe, and I really like the fact that it's a lighter shoe here as well too. The On Cloudmonster 2 is a more protective shoe. You're getting more stack, you're getting a firmer feel still, even though it is a little bit softer than the original Cloudmonster, and you're getting probably a little bit more life out of the shoe in general. It's gonna soak up those longer runs a lot better than the On Cloudeclipse, but ultimately I don't think it's out of a Cloudeclipse remit to be able to be a long run kind of shoe as well too. So if it was me, I would be getting the On Cloudeclipse. I think it's a better all-round shoe. I think it's the best kind of max cushion shoe from On. Its best shoe probably that it's launched so far. And a signal that where I think On needs to go. And I was hoping maybe that's where the On Cloudmonster 2 was going to go. Based on what we've seen between the On Cloudmonster launch and what's happened since then in terms of its midsoles and the midsole changes. Ultimately, that hasn't been the case. So if you are looking for a On shoe, a max cushion shoe, a shoe that can work for longer distances, can be an up-tempo one, also look good, because obviously On shoes do look good, then I would be going for the On Cloudeclipse. I think it's quite a kind of easy choice here between these two shoes.
So there you have it. That's been our head-to-head between the On Cloudmonster 2 and the On Cloudeclipse. We hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, hit us up in the comments below. If you've had the chance to run in either or both of these shoes, we'd love to hear your comments. How did you find them? Which one do you think is better? Let us know. Don't forget to like and subscribe and to ring the bell to find out when more great Run Testers videos land on the channel. If you want a full review of both of these shoes, those videos are going to be appearing on the channel just about now. Otherwise, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you about these shoes. Thanks again for watching, and we hope to see you again soon on the Run Testers. Happy running, people.